Sam and I are out here scouting today, and as you can see, we are in a marsh type habitat, and we're basically walking transition lines and doing some island hopping. Really looking for bedding, as well as how that bedding relates specifically to potential food sources come September. So for us, that's like white oaks would be huge. We can find white oaks close to a bedding area on high ground there where we can, devise a way to get in and be able to hunt it. That's kind of what we're looking for right now. And walking this transition line, we just came up on our first bed. It's not on an island, it's just on a little micro point out of this mainland. But we can tell it's a bed because we got this matted down ice, which means that the deer is probably bedding on it with a certain amount of snow and it just compacted and froze. And then also we have droppings that we can see here. It's matted down in some other spots, so this deer could be, bedding in a couple little potential, spots within a spot, but this is where it's bedding. And we have a big trail that cuts into the woods. And then we also have a big trail going the opposite direction toward one of these other islands. Got some droppings right here. So we're still on this point, but the challenging thing here is how do we set up on this? Because as I'm looking around, you can see obviously right behind me here, we got a couple big red oaks, which definitely supply a food source. They're not going to be as big of a draw as a white oak would be. In this type of area, I can see another big red oak back there. But the challenging thing is I'm literally standing about 15, 20 yards away from where a couple of those beds were. So as I'm looking back here, the best I could potentially do would be this big red oak that I see back here, another 20, 30 yards. So I'd be setting up really close to where those beds are, but it's the only tree that's just out of the way enough, and it's also big enough to be able to support me, where I could potentially still sneak in an arrow through right to where I'm standing right here, and those deer would be just out of sight. And if you blow out a spot like this, we know that we're surrounded by some of these islands. That would be the next logical step. If you blow this spot out, those deer are going to relocate to where they feel a little bit more secure bedding, and those are going to be the things that we check out next. All right, so we just walked over to this next point, and it looks good on the point. There's some big heavy trails leading it, and you can see we got this brush right here. Then there's a couple spots that there's not the sign right now, but I almost wonder if the sign's not just being covered up right now with the snow, because that's the type of spot I would expect to see a bed. Could just be too that last year's a little bit wetter. Maybe they were bedding on more dry ground. But we have a white oak just into the trees right back there. And if that thing was dropping, that would be the spot to set up. We have, in addition to that trail coming out here to this brush, we got a big trail that heads basically right to that island right over there. We're gonna first keep continuing to go down this transition line of this mainland until we find another point right down here that I can see. That's again a short shot to its closest island. So we'll just go down and hit that, and then we'll loop back up through all these islands. So we just got to this last little point here before we start island hopping, and we couldn't really see any beds on this point in particular, but we have a white oak right here, not a huge one by any means, another small one, but there's a lot of red oaks around here too, and I can see just a big heavy trail cutting into the woods down along this point, and it's just wide open leading out to some of that stuff out there. It's almost kind of a split trail right here where you can tell that over the years the deer have used this as a travel corridor, point A to point B type of thing, to where even if they're not bedding right at this point, there's some food here. They obviously travel through this spot. So we made it out to this first island here, and this one's a little bit bigger, and it seems like in general when you get some of these bigger islands where you get a little bit more elevation change out of them, you seem to find more white oaks, and that's definitely the case with this island. It's only maybe 40 yards across where we're at right now, and it kind of just stays narrow and then it gets big and ballooned. But I mean, from where I'm standing and where we walk through here, there's probably at least 10 to 15 white oaks about like that. And so on the edge of this, I can see a lot of brush. We can see a trail on kind of the downward side, right on the edge of the marsh. A lot of droppings from last year that are starting to be uncovered. and some remnants of an old wooden deer stand again. What you could do in a spot like this, where there's a lot of potential good food sources, and they could kind of travel right along this island, or just kind of meander and feed on acorns, would be you get up on this island during a time when the acorns are dropping, and you just stand there and just listen and see where you can hear. If there's one oak tree dropping more than the others, then maybe that's the one you go set up on for that particular day. So that's probably how we would treat this particular island, where it's not an exact bed to an exact white oak tree. There's a lot of spots that could move, so we just would have to kind of take a best guess and pick on the day of the hunt. Still haven't seen a lot of what I would consider, big buck sign, not a lot of rubs, hardly any rubs actually, which may indicate that there's a little bit less buck pressure here amongst each other, maybe not a large number of mature bucks, but we'll just kind of keep scouting this and see what we see. So this last island that we're on here was the first one that we finally found some rubs from last year on, which is a nice thing to see. We see all these different spots that don't have it, and then you finally find one that does. I also had a couple medium-sized white oaks on it, and I can see a trail coming off the point here, and it heads to that island over there. So we're getting about to the point here where it's almost easier for us to scout all that stuff from a different area, like a different place to park. So even though we got some sign that's telling us we might go this way, we can probably hit that on a different day, and we'll continue with the plan of working this direction like we had started off with. They're still going to have plenty of stuff to walk today, I think. And this island could potentially be, I'm thinking, a good spot just based on the way that it all sets up. Got some bag cover over on that side that the deer could come from, and there's also a bunch of brush on this side that the deer could come from and hit up that island. And there's plenty of spots to be able to set up on it and be able to see a lot of what's going on that particular island. So we're on one of these offshoot islands off that last one we were on that had a bunch of the white oaks, and this one doesn't have any white oaks. I can tell it's a lot smaller, it's a lot thicker. Look at all this brush here. But this would be definitely a bedding island. We got a bed right here. You can see an old rub right next to it, and I can see a fresh one from last year into that brush a ways, and we saw some droppings but through the melted snow. So I would know that this island right here could be a potential spot where I could expect to see a deer moving from to get to that island right over there where we'd be setting up on. It's probably about 120, 140 yards, I'd guess, but you wouldn't be able to set up in this island because there's no way you could get set up here without tipping this deer off. You'd just be getting too close. So the food is over there. He's got to move. There's a couple of red oaks here, but if those white oaks are dropping, you got to imagine he's just going to go right to those white oaks. So again, that would be the setup island over there that we were just on. This would be one of the bedding islands. And then you could, of course, be bedding on some of those brushy spots too. But I think some of that could just depend on how high the water is. Last year we had really high water. So these island type spots, these smaller islands where everything is above ground, you got bigger trees, would be the more likely spots for them to bed. You can tell that number one, that rub back there, the deer would have had to walk through a lot of those little sticks and things like that to be able to get to that tree to rub it. Also, just looking at the height of these rubs, they're not very tall. I mean, this one right here, right, like not even to the top of my thigh. So I'm gonna take a guess here and say that this is not a very big deer that left this sign. Last fall when I hunted this area, there were some islands that I found that just, you find rubs that were well above waist high on bigger trees. And so I think that, the more of these things we can scout and keep taking notes on, eventually we're going to find some where it's like, oh man, like this could be good the next fall. And that's obviously why we do stuff like this, these spring scouting missions. Probably one of the best parts, or at least my favorite part about scouting exactly this time of the year. And granted, I'd like it if all of the snow was melted, but this stuff that I'm standing on right now is basically floating bog. Come, September, October next year, I'm gonna sink into probably close to my knee, and it's gonna feel like I'm walking on a waterbed every step. Really hard to walk on, and you always have the risk of just kind of punching through and getting up a lot deeper. So being able to scout this time of year allows us to just fly through all of this stuff. It's so flat out over all this stuff. If you're at a gun hunting like one of those trees, you'd be able to see a long ways. Whereas cattails, if you're sitting up in cattails, you can't really see unless you can see right down the trail or if they're right underneath you. Well, they're pushing deer out to you for one. And when you get some of these spots where you have, I mean, you're peppered with islands, but if you can get an island that has a lot of islands around it, then that just kind of maximizes the chance that a deer uses your island as a hub to travel from one place to another. So we just got to an island here that we're pretty excited about. If you kind of look at some of these islands, you just kind of scan across the marsh, you'll see some that have these big oaks that you can see from a long ways away because they're tall, obviously, and they still got leaves hanging on them. And then there's other islands that you look at and they just look kind of scrubby. They're not very big trees, but they're really thick. That's kind of, at a high level, what we're kind of talking about when I say a bedding island or a food island. Well, this one is definitely what we would call could be a food island. There's a lot of white oaks, some big mature white oaks, and this one, in contrast to some of the ones that we looked at before, you can see a lot of historical rubs right in through here throughout this whole island. We see a fresh one from last fall, another one from last fall that's actually got some good height to it, and this thing is surrounded by what we deem, bedding islands. And just kind of looking at that first bedding island, it's tough to tell with the amount of snow here where the exact bed is. A lot of that stuff, if it's not being used right now, it's hard to see exactly where that is, but you just kind of assume based on the sign here on some of these bigger islands. And again, the sunlight's able to hit this island and a lot of these big open ones and melt some of the snow, and we're starting to see some of the trails and the droppings, even some scrapes that we would normally see without the snow. So you can kind of assume that even though some of those thicker bedding islands still have a lot of snow and they're not being used recently, that if the snow were melted, we'd likely see sign on those as well. So that's kind of the basis for those assumptions. I mean, this whole place is just shredded. There's big rubs all over the place. There's droppings, well-beaten trail. I thought we'd find a bed on the tip of this thing, but it almost looks like it continues and just goes out onto that next island down there. But there's no white oaks on this island, which is a good thing, which means it might not, if the white oaks are falling, they're not going to probably spend a whole bunch of time here. They're probably just going to zip right through it, get to one of those bigger islands that you'd be set up on. So you can definitely see all the beds right here. The amount of droppings, I mean, the droppings don't seem very big. I don't know how much you can tell always by the size of droppings. But just the way that it's set up here, and there's not a lot of rubs right here. There's some rubs back behind me, but leads me to think that this might be doe bedding right here, but I could be wrong. It's tough to say for sure. There's nothing super fresh. The droppings are all from last fall. There's no hair, so they haven't bedded here recently, but it's definitely clear enough that this was being used last fall. There's not a lot of big oak trees on this island. It's not very open. It doesn't rise up at a big mound like some of those other ones do. It's more flat, more dense, thick, and that's where we're seeing some of these beds.
I would shoot this buck.
Yeah, for sure. That was a pretty fun day. Saw a lot of stuff. Found some particular places that I think we're pretty excited about in terms of sign that we saw. And found Sam's first shed, so that was exciting. The Onyx is telling us that we put on just about 7 miles, and we still got about 3/4 of a mile to get back to the truck. So all in all, good day. We'll get back, put all the waypoints in the computer. I guess I'll be there already, but we'll look at them on the computer and just look at the big picture, see how all this stuff that we found today meshes together. And then we'll figure out what that means for which chunk of land we want to check out the next time based on that. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to learn more about this style of habitat and what to look for specifically, definitely recommend you check out the Hunting Beast. Dan Infalt was pretty instrumental way back when I first started to hunt this type of stuff and figure it out on my own. So definitely check that out. And with that, thanks for watching.